Imagine an expanding explosive lake high up in the Himalayas, a lethal stealth submarine quietly clipping into the waters off the coast of Mumbai, and a teenager's thumbprint being instantly scanned by a beat cop on a busy Delhi street. Welcome to the daily deep dive 3D initiative of UPSC with Saurabh Kaushik for Saturday, June 20th, 2026.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, if you're joining us today, you are likely preparing for, well, one of the most rigorous examinations in the entire world. And our mission in this deep dive is to help you shift from just memorizing isolated facts to actually building an interconnected web of knowledge.
Right, because that's the crucial difference, between merely reading the daily news and actually analyzing it. We take all these scattered pieces of today's events, break down the mechanisms of how they actually work, and build the full picture.
Exactly. So before we get into the weeds, I just want to give you a rapid-fire roadmap of the 27 topics covered in today's notes. This spans the entire syllabus, including our prelims and mapping points, which we will, weave directly into the conversation.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so we're looking at India taking a leadership role at the FATF in Paris, a profound diplomatic shift at the UN regarding Pakistan, the crumbling Iran nuclear framework centered around Fordo, and the mechanics of our massive Russian oil imports.
Right, the Voskro count.
Yeah, exactly. From there, we examine domestic constitutional frictions. So the Supreme Court declaring safe footpaths a fundamental right, the digital quarantine of the Telegram app, Nagaland pushing back on language policies, and the exact mathematics of political defections.
That's the 10 schedule stuff.
Yep. Then we look at the state's expanding capabilities, from the new scan fingerprint app to sweeping judicial timelines, while grappling with a severe brain drain in our district courts and the reality of employment data. We'll also dissect India's defense and energy hardware. So the simultaneous launch of 3 warships at Mazagon Dock, the push for drone tech transfers, the medical battle against sickle cell anemia, and BHEL's new naval turbines.
It's a packed day.
Totally. And finally, we tackle the massive environmental and structural hurdles ahead. Everything from grid curtailment in Rajasthan's solar parks to ozone spikes, the struggle to green our heavy industries, the climate threats to our borders in Tawang, the structural gaps in women's workforce participation, the unification of our weather data, and the dramatic collapse of left-wing extremism in Bastar.
It sounds like a lot, I know. But by the end of this deep dive, you will see the connective tissue binding every single one of these issues together.
Let's jump right in. There is a massive development in international finance. India has just been elected as the vice president of the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, for the 2026-2027 term.
Right.
Vivek Agrawal will be taking over this role. Now, I understand the FATF is headquartered in Paris, and it's the global watchdog for money laundering, but what actual power does a vice president hold? Is this just a ceremonial title for a diplomat?
Well, no, it's far from ceremonial. It's actually deeply strategic.
Yeah.
To understand the weight of this, we need to look at the machinery of the FATF itself. Established back in 1989 by the G7, the FATF currently has 39 members. They set 40 specific recommendations that act as the gold standard for global financial integrity.
Right, the recommendation.
Yeah, and if a country doesn't comply, they end up on the gray list for increased monitoring, or worse, the blacklist, which essentially cuts them off from global finance by making international transactions prohibitively expensive. So, as vice president, India will be in the inner sanctum setting the agenda.
Wait, setting the agenda meaning we decide who gets scrutinized?
Partially yes, but more importantly, the VP helps define what compliance actually means for new emerging technologies. Right now, the FATF is trying to regulate virtual assets like cryptocurrency
Right.
and secure cross-border digital payments and tackle complex trade-based money laundering. India runs the UPI ecosystem, right, which is one of the largest digital payment networks globally. By holding the VP seat, we ensure that as the FATF writes new rules for digital finance, those rules actually accommodate our domestic financial architecture rather than penalizing it.
That makes a lot of sense. But let's look at the person taking the job. Vivek Agrawal is a 1994 batch IAS officer, currently serving as the secretary in the Ministry of Culture. Putting a culture secretary in charge of global financial intelligence seems a bit counterintuitive.
It does, yeah, until you look at his previous track record, which is exactly why he was chosen. Before his culture posting, Agrawal was the director of FIUIND. That's the Financial Intelligence Unit of India.
Let's break that down for a second. What exactly does the FIU do? I see that acronym pop up in economic offenses all the time, but...
So the FIU is basically the central plumbing of India's anti-money laundering system. Imagine every bank insurance company, and stockbroker in the country as a censor. Whenever they spot a transaction that looks suspiciously large or convoluted, they are legally required to file a suspicious transaction report, or STR. The FIU receives millions of these reports. They use advanced data analytics to find the hidden patterns, the shell companies, the layering of illicit funds. Then they package that actionable intelligence and hand it over to enforcement agencies like the ED or the CBI. Vivek Agrawal ran that entire system. He knows the granular mechanics of illicit finance inside and out.
Wow. So India isn't just sending a diplomat, we are sending a financial forensic expert to Paris.
Exactly.
How does this fit into our broader strategic posture right now, especially considering our neighborhood?
It's a profound geopolitical win. For decades, India has been a rule taker at the FATF, undergoing grueling mutual evaluations to prove our own compliance. And by the way, India is currently in the regular follow-up category based on our 2024 report.
Which is good, right?
It's the highest possible rating, shared by countries like France and the UK. But now, we're shifting from rule taker to rule maker. Following Operation Sindoor in 2025, where India took kinetic action against cross-border terror infrastructure, we need diplomatic and financial muscle to squeeze the funding networks of those terror groups. Earning a seat at the head of the global financial table gives us exactly that leverage.
Which transitions perfectly into how India is leveraging its diplomatic vocabulary on the global stage. At a UN Security Council open debate in New York, India's permanent representative, Parvathani Harish, explicitly termed Pakistan a Frankenstein state.
Yeah.
That is a very specific, loaded term to use in an official UN forum.
It's a highly calculated framing. Harish pointed out that Pakistan's state apparatus deliberately created, nurtured, and financed terrorist groups as strategic proxies. Groups like the Haqqani network in Afghanistan or Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, which targeted India. But now, the monster has slipped its leash. These very proxies, specifically the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP, are actively conducting massive terror attacks inside Pakistan, turning their guns on their creators.
It's the classic Mary Shelley analogy. It's like arguing, you can't keep venomous snakes in your backyard and expect them to only bite your neighbors. But why use this specific literary framing at the UN? Like, why not just say what we've always said? Pakistan sponsors terror against India.
Because the old framing had a ceiling. For decades, India's argument was inherently bilateral. We told the world, Pakistan is hurting India. The problem is, if you are a diplomat from a non-SAARC country, say in South America or West Africa, you might look at that and say, well, that sounds like a regional border dispute between two nuclear-armed neighbors. It doesn't really affect me.
Ah, I see. So by calling it a Frankenstein state, we're changing the narrative.
Precisely. We are arguing that state-sponsored terrorism is a structurally unstable model that eventually collapses outward, creating a global systemic risk. We're telling the world that this isn't just an Indian problem, it's a global security imperative. This connects directly to the UN 1267 Committee, which administers international sanctions against individuals linked to al-Qaeda and ISIS. India is building a legally watertight narrative that Pakistan's intelligence and military structures are hopelessly intertwined with these designated global threats.
And the timing of this isn't an accident, is it? I mean, we are entering into bilateral trade agreement negotiations with the U.S. right now.
Exactly. Counterterrorism cooperation is a major pillar of those U.S. negotiations. By establishing this Frankenstein narrative at the UNSC right after the kinetic realities of Operation Sindoor, India is laying the diplomatic groundwork to demand tighter international sanctions. And circling back to our first topic, deeper FATF scrutiny against its neighbor.
Right, yeah. So while South Asia deals with the fallout of state-sponsored proxies, an even more volatile proxy war in West Asia is threatening to shatter the global economy. I want to look at the Iran-Muscat Accord, which seems to be collapsing before it even really begins.
Yeah, it's a textbook example of how fragile international agreements can be when they are built on unacknowledged structural flaws. Let's recall the basics of the Muscat Accord, signed on June 14th between the U.S. and Iran. It was a phased deal to de-escalate tensions. Phase 1 successfully reopened the Strait of Hormuz, lifted immediate maritime blockades, and importantly, froze Iran's nuclear enrichment at 60%.
Okay.
Phase 2 was a 60-day negotiation window set to expire on August 13th, which was supposed to finalize the long-term protocols for Iranian nuclear facilities.
The most famous of those being the Fordo facility. If we are mapping this for you guys, Fordo is an underground, heavily fortified uranium enrichment site built right into a mountain. It's basically the geographic center of Western anxieties about Iran's nuclear breakout capacity.
That's right. Fordo is where the most sensitive centrifuges are housed. The entire goal of Phase 2 was to get IAEA inspectors full, unhindered access to places like Fordo to ensure that 60% enrichment didn't creep up to 90%, which is weapons grade.
But then, just days into this window, Israel launched massive airstrikes on Hezbollah military infrastructure in southern Lebanon, and Iran immediately hit the brakes and suspended the Phase 2 talks. How does an airstrike in Lebanon derail a nuclear talk between Washington and Tehran?
Well, because of the complex web of proxy alliances. Hezbollah is Iran's most powerful regional proxy. Iran's argument is that they cannot legitimately sit at a negotiating table with the United States in good faith, while the United States' closest ally in the region, Israel, is actively dismantling Iranian military assets in Lebanon.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, from Tehran's perspective, the U.S. is either complicit in the strikes or completely powerless to stop its ally, making the negotiations worthless.
Wait, but did Israel ever agree to this Muscat Accord in the first place?
No, and that is the structural design flaw I mentioned. Israel is not a party to the Muscat Accord. In fact, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu flatly stated that Israel is not bound by it, calling the strikes in Lebanon legitimate preemptive self-defense against Hezbollah rocket launchers.
It seems like Washington drew up a contract for peace in a room, but completely forgot to ask the most heavily armed and motivated guy in the room to sign it. Israel actually has a strategic incentive to derail this deal, don't they?
Many analysts argue they do, yeah.
Yeah.
From the Israeli security perspective, any deal that leaves Iran with 60% enrichment capabilities intact and lifts economic sanctions allowing Tehran to funnel more money to Hezbollah and Hamas is an existential threat. They have zero incentive to play along with Washington's diplomatic timeline if it compromises their immediate border security.
And the global markets panicked instantly. Brent crude jumped from 88 times to $96 a barrel within hours of the suspension. For a UPSC aspirant looking at the Indian economy, how vulnerable are we to this specific geopolitical spat?
Highly vulnerable. India imports over 80% of its oil. Our energy ministry immediately mapped out contingency plans. Scenario A was that the accord holds and oil stays between $85 and $95. That's out the window.
Gone.
Yeah, we are currently in scenario B. The Lebanon escalation delays talks but doesn't cause a total collapse, pushing oil to the $95 to $110 range. The nightmare is scenario C, a full collapse. The U.S. reinstates secondary sanctions and blockades, and oil spikes above $115. The government just announced a 5 rupee per liter fuel price rollback for domestic consumers. If scenario C hits, that rollback will vaporize, inflation will spike, and our current account deficit will just widen. The August 13th deadline is a ticking time bomb.
Because if they are suspended for a few weeks, they simply run out of days to negotiate the immensely technical nuclear protocols before the window closes. Which brings us to the massive, controversial safety net India has spent the last 4 years building to insulate itself from exactly this kind of Middle Eastern volatility. Let's look at our record-breaking Russian oil imports.
The numbers are staggering, they really are, and represent a permanent tectonic shift in global energy flows. In May 2026, India imported 2.35 million barrels per day of Russian crudes. That means Russian oil now constitutes an unbelievable 42% of our total crude imports.
Just to give that context, before the Russia-Ukraine war started in early 2022, what was that percentage?
Less than 1%.
Wow.
We went from less than 1% to 42% in 4 years.
That is a fundamental rewiring of our energy supply chain. And the initial driver was purely opportunistic economics, right? Like, following Western sanctions, Russia offered massive discounts.
Exactly. Even during this recent Strait of Hormuz crisis, Russian Urals crude was trading at an $8 to $12 discount compared to Brent crude. But here is the critical insight for the deep dive. This is no longer just a temporary opportunistic trade. We aren't just buying it because it's on sale today. This has become a structural embed in our economy.
What do you mean by structural embed? Isn't oil just oil?
Not at all. Crude oil comes in many different chemical profiles.
Yeah.
Middle Eastern crude is typically light and sweet, meaning it has lower density and lower sulfur content. It is easier to refine. Russian Urals crude is heavy and sour. It has high density and high sulfur. India has some of the most sophisticated refineries in the world, owned by giants like Reliance, BPCL, and IOC. Over the last 3 years, these companies have spent billions physically reconfiguring their downstream processing units, their distillation columns, their desulfurization units, to optimally process this specific, heavy Russian chemical profile.
So the actual plumbing of our refineries has been altered to digest Russian oil.
Precisely. Reverting those complex, capital-intensive units back to optimally process Middle Eastern crude would be incredibly expensive and inefficient. Economically and infrastructurally, we are locked into Russian crude for at least the next 5 to 7 years, regardless of minor fluctuations in the global discount rate.
Okay, let's unpack the financial mechanics of this because this is where it gets incredibly complicated. We aren't paying Russia in US dollars because Russian banks are locked out of the SWIFT international messaging system by Western sanctions. So how are we physically paying for 2.35 million barrels a day?
We use the special rupee-ruble exchange mechanism, the SREP. Because they can't take dollars, India pays for this oil in Indian rupees. These rupees are deposited into what are called Vostro accounts.
Stop there. Explain a Vostro account to me like I'm 5.
Sure. Imagine you have a bank in Moscow like Sberbank. They want to hold Indian rupees, but they don't have physical branches in India. So Sberbank opens a special account at a domestic Indian bank, say the State Bank of India.
Right.
The SBI holds the rupees on behalf of Sberbank. For SBI, it's a Vostro account, which is Latin for yours, meaning your money that we are holding. So when an Indian refiner buys Russian oil, they just transfer rupees from their Indian bank account into the Russian bank's Vostro account here in India.
That sounds incredibly convenient. So what is the problem?
The problem is the sheer scale of the imbalance.
Yeah.
Russia has now accumulated an estimated 1.5 lakh crore rupees in these Vostro balances inside India.
Wait, 1.5 lakh crore? That is a mountain of cash. But why is it a problem? I mean, it's their money.
Because it's trapped. The rupee is not a fully convertible global currency like the dollar or the euro. Russia can't just take that 1.5 lakh crore to the international market and buy microchips from Taiwan or machinery from Germany. The only way Russia can actually utilize that money is to spend it inside India by buying Indian exports or investing in Indian infrastructure.
But we don't make enough of what Russia wants to buy.
Exactly. India's exports to Russia, pharmaceuticals, textiles, some electronics, are just a drop in the ocean compared to the massive volume of oil we're importing. We're running a $45 billion trade deficit with them. So Russia is sitting on this massive pile of rupees, suffering from currency depreciation, with very few avenues to actually deploy it.
So it's essentially a Vostro trap. We get the cheap oil we desperately need to keep our economy running, but Russia is forced to hoard a currency they can't use. Meanwhile, how is the United States reacting to this? Aren't there supposed to be price caps on Russian oil?
Yeah, the G7 imposed a $60 per barrel price cap. If you buy Russian oil above that price, you are theoretically barred from using Western shipping companies or Western maritime insurance, like the Lloyd's of London, to move the oil.
So how are we bypassing it?
By building our own ecosystem. India is increasingly using domestic shipping, non-Western flagged ghost fleets, and Indian or sovereign-backed insurance frameworks. Our diplomatic stance has been remarkably firm. We are not a party to the G7 mechanism, and our primary obligation is securing energy for our 1.4 billion citizens at the best commercial price.
And the U.S. just accepts that.
Well, in the ongoing bilateral trade agreement talks, the U.S. has tacitly accepted this reality, recognizing that if India suddenly stopped buying Russian oil, global prices would explode, hurting Western economies too. The U.S. only demands that India doesn't act as a conduit to actively help Russia acquire restricted military or dual-use tech.
That geopolitical gridlock is fascinating. But while we're stuck navigating these immense international boundaries, we're also struggling to navigate our own physical streets. Let's bring this down to the hyper-local level. The Supreme Court has just handed down a landmark judgment declaring that walking on safe footpaths is a fundamental right.
This is a profound shift in urban governance. Justices Purdiwala and Mahadevan explicitly ruled that the encroachment of footpaths deprives citizens of their right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 of the Constitution.
For context, this ruling came out of a public interest litigation looking at the absolute chaos of pedestrian infrastructure in major metros like Delhi, Mumbai, and Kolkata. If you've walked in these cities, you know footpaths exist mostly in theory. They're blocked by hawkers, parked cars, massive electricity transformers, or construction debris. Pedestrians are literally forced to walk in fast-moving, lethal traffic.
And the statistics are horrifying. India sees roughly 1.5 lakh pedestrian deaths annually. That is about 15 to 17% of all road fatalities. To understand this from a constitutional perspective, we have to look at how the Supreme Court has expanded Article 21 over the decades.
Right. Originally, the right to life was interpreted very narrowly.
Yes, originally it was viewed as a negative obligation. It simply meant the state cannot unlawfully kill you or arbitrarily throw you in prison. But starting with the landmark Maneka Gandhi case in 1978, the court expanded it to mean a right to live with dignity. Then, in the Olga Tellis case in 1985, they brought in the right to livelihood. With this new footpath ruling, we are seeing the imposition of a strong positive obligation on the state. It is no longer enough for the state to just leave you alone. The state must actively build and maintain safe, physical infrastructure for you to survive the urban environment.
That is a beautiful constitutional evolution on paper. But on the ground, this creates a massive friction point, particularly with the Street Vendors Act of 2014.
You've hit on the exact core of the conflict. The Street Vendors Act was designed to protect the urban poor. Historically, hawkers faced relentless harassment, extortion, and arbitrary eviction by police and municipal authorities. The 2014 Act mandated the creation of designated vending zones and town vending committees to formalize their right to earn a living.
But space is a zero-sum game in a city, so we're basically pitting two incredibly vulnerable groups against each other. You have pedestrians just trying not to get run over by a bus, and you have poor vendors just trying to sell vegetables to feed their families, and they are battling over 3 feet of concrete.
And the Supreme Court recognized this tension, but they drew a hard line. The right to livelihood under the Street Vendors Act does not permit vending that entirely obstructs the pedestrian right-of-way. The primary purpose of a footpath is passage.
So who actually has to fix this? The Supreme Court can't go out and clear the streets.
The burden falls entirely on the urban local bodies, the ULBs, your municipal corporations. Under the 74 Constitutional Amendment of 1992, the 12th Schedule explicitly lists urban planning, regulation of land use, and roads as ULB functions. The court has now directed all states to file status reports and ordered these municipalities to submit concrete footpath action plans. It elevates road safety from an optional municipal policy to an enforceable constitutional right.
Just as the state is being forced to clear physical encroachments on our streets, it is simultaneously aggressively clearing what it sees as digital encroachments on public order. We are moving from the boundaries of concrete to the boundaries of the internet. The Delhi High Court has upheld the central government's order blocking the Telegram messaging app around the NEET re-exam.
Let's set the stage for why this happened. Following the disastrous NEET medical entrance exam paper leaks in May, a highly sensitive re-exam was scheduled for June 21st. To prevent another leak from spreading, the government invoked Section 69A of the Information Technology Act to completely block Telegram across India from June 16th to the 22nd.
Section 69A is a sledgehammer of a law. It allows the executive to block public access to information for reasons like the sovereignty of India, defense, security of the state, or public order. Telegram challenged the block in court, but the High Court sided with the government. My question is, how did the court justify blocking a communication platform used by millions of innocent people just to stop a paper leak?
Well, the court relied on the proportionality test. This is a vital concept in constitutional law when examining state restrictions. If the state is going to infringe on a fundamental right, in this case, the freedom of speech and expression under Article 19A, the state's action must be proportional to the threat.
So what were the 4 pillars of that test in this case?
First, the restriction was time-limited. It was a 4-day block, not a permanent, indefinite ban. Second, the court agreed there was a compelling state interest, protecting the integrity of a national exam, determining the futures of 25 lakh students. Third, the prevention of a cognizable offense under the IT Act was met. And fourth, the executive action was subject to judicial review, which is exactly what the High Court was doing.
I read the government's affidavit in this case, and the rhetoric was striking. They didn't just call Telegram a messaging app, they explicitly labeled it the new dark web.
And from a law enforcement perspective, it functionally is. Telegram operates very differently from WhatsApp. It features massive, anonymous broadcast channels that can hold millions of users, heavily encrypted secret chats, and automated bot networks that can instantly distribute files.
Wow.
Furthermore, Telegram's corporate structure is notoriously opaque, and historically they've offered very limited to zero cooperation with Indian law enforcement when asked to take down pirated content or trace the origins of illegal material. It allows bad actors to evade surveillance, much like the Tor network.
So the government is arguing that because the app is structurally designed to evade law enforcement, a total block is the only option. But isn't blocking an entire app for millions of people to stop a paper leak like quarantining an entire city to catch one sick person?
It is a blunt instrument, absolutely. But the High Court deemed it a necessary quarantine for a highly specific, time-bound crisis. However, the court didn't just give the government a blank check. They explicitly directed the Ministry of Electronics and IT to justify any continuation of the block after June 21st. More importantly, the court turned its crosshairs on Telegram itself. They ordered the company to submit a compliance plan under the IT rules of 2021 within 30 days.
Right, because Telegram is massive in India. It qualifies as a significant social media intermediary, or SSMI.
Exactly. Any platform with over 5 million registered users in India is an SSMI. Under the 2021 rules, the legal obligations are strict. You must appoint a resident grievance officer, a chief compliance officer, and a nodal contact person who is based in India and available 247 to law enforcement. You must publish monthly compliance reports detailing exactly what content you took down. Telegram has largely ignored these mandates, operating in a legal gray area.
It seems like the era of digital platforms ignoring sovereign laws is ending globally.
Yes. Look at the European Union's Digital Services Act, which aggressively forces large tech platforms to police illegal content or face crippling fines. Telegram's ongoing non-compliance in India sets the stage for a much larger regulatory showdown. The NEET exam was just the catalyst. The real battle is over sovereign control of digital spaces.
And while the center asserts its mandate over the digital space, it is facing fierce pushback regarding its mandates in the cultural space, specifically how we are taught to speak. We are shifting focus to the Northeast. CBSE-affiliated schools in Nagaland have formally rejected the National Education Policy's three-language formula.
This is a complex intersection of education policy, federalism, and deep-rooted constitutional rights.
Yeah.
To understand the friction, we have to look at the demographics. Nagaland does not have a single dominant state language like Tamil Nadu has Tamil or Bengal has Bengali. The state is home to over 16 distinct tribal language groups, the Angami, the Ao, the Konyak, the Lotha, and many others. Because of this extreme linguistic diversity, English serves as the official state language and the primary medium of instruction, acting as a neutral bridge.
So when the National Education Policy 2020 introduces a three-language formula, what exactly is it asking these schools to do?
The formula suggests students should learn three languages: their mother tongue, another Indian language, and English. The CBSE schools in Nagaland submitted a representation to the Ministry of Education stating this is educationally unviable and culturally inappropriate. They argue that forcing a third language into the curriculum eats up the very limited academic time they desperately need to preserve their indigenous tribal languages, many of which are endangered.
But wait, I've read the NEP document. It explicitly states no language will be imposed on any state. It says the third language can be any Indian language. So why are the schools panicking? Are they fighting the text of the policy, or are they fighting the invisible hand of implementation?
They are absolutely fighting the invisible hand. The text of the NEP is flexible, yes. But in practice, when it comes to designing standardized curricula, producing millions of textbooks, and conducting national board exams, the structural bureaucratic pressure heavily favors Hindi. There simply isn't a massive federal infrastructure to provide high-quality CBSE board exams in Konyak or Lotha. The schools are preempting what they see as the subtle, structural coercion of Hindi, which offers little immediate economic benefit for students remaining within the state economy.
And this isn't just an administrative complaint. They have serious constitutional armor for this fight. Let's talk about Article 29 and Article 371A.
Right. Article 29 guarantees any section of citizens residing in India the right to conserve their distinct language, script, or culture. For the Naga tribes, language is the absolute bedrock of their identity. Any federal mandate that structurally marginalizes their mother tongues can be challenged here.
And then there's the special provision.
Yes, Article 371A. This is a special constitutional provision specifically for Nagaland. It guarantees that no act of parliament in respect to Naga customary law, social practices, and religious frameworks shall apply to the state unless the state legislative assembly decides so by a resolution. Now, education formally falls under the concurrent List Entry 25.
Meaning both the center and the state can make laws on it.
Exactly. But the spirit of 371A creates a powerful political shield. Any central policy that threatens tribal cultural autonomy will face severe legal and political resistance.
If we look at our mapping notes, this linguistic anxiety isn't isolated. It brings to mind Kozhikode in Kerala, which is currently in the news for a Nipah virus outbreak. But historically, Kerala has been the political epicenter of resistance against perceived Hindi imposition in the south. The pushback in Nagaland is a direct echo of that same federal friction.
It perfectly highlights what happens when broad central frameworks try to blanket deep localized diversity.
This tension between central authority and local political maneuvering brings us perfectly to the actual mechanics of our state legislatures. I want to dissect a piece from The Hindu that analyzed the 10th schedule, following some massive political floor crossing in Maharashtra. How do politicians keep switching sides without getting fired?
Well, the 10th schedule, widely known as the anti-defection law, was added to the Constitution by the 52nd Amendment in 1985. The goal was to stop the infamous Ayaram Gayaram culture, where MLAs would change parties multiple times a week for bribes or ministerial posts. The law lays out specific grounds for disqualifying an elected member, voluntarily giving up party membership, or voting against the party whip in the legislature.
But as with any law, politicians immediately started looking for the loophole.
And they found a big one. Originally, the law had an exemption for a split. If 1/3 of a legislative party broke away at the same time, it wasn't considered defection. It was a split, and they were protected from disqualification.
Which just meant instead of retail bribery, we got wholesale bribery. You just bought MLAs in bulk.
Precisely. It legitimized mass defections. Recognizing this disaster, Parliament passed the 91st Amendment in 2003, which completely deleted the split provision. Today, the only surviving exemption in the 10th schedule is a merger.
Okay, explain the exact mathematical and legal mechanics of a valid merger today, because this is where the loopholes are currently being exploited.
It is incredibly stringent. A valid merger requires two distinct conditions to be met simultaneously. First, the legislative wing, the elected MLAs or MPs must agree. Specifically, at least 2/3 of the legislative party must agree to merge. So if a party has 15 MLAs, at least 10 must jump ship together.
Okay, that's the math part. What's the second condition?
The second condition is much harder. The original political party itself, meaning the organizational wing, the national or state executive committee, the party president, must pass a formal legal resolution to merge their entire party with the new party. You need both the legislative supermajority and the organizational mandate.
I see. But rebel MLAs often secure the 2/3 numbers, but obviously the original party president isn't going to vote to dissolve their own party. So how did the rebels survive?
By creating a massive jurisdictional clash between two powerful authorities, the Speaker of the House and the Election Commission of India. A crucial Supreme Court ruling in 2023, coming out of the Maharashtra Shiv Sena crisis, clarified this battlefield.
How does the battlefield break down?
The Speaker of the Assembly has the exclusive power to decide on disqualification petitions under the 10th schedule. However, the Speaker does not have the power to decide which competing faction represents the real political party. That power belongs exclusively to the Election Commission under the Election Symbols, Reservation and Allotment Order of 1968.
So it's a dual-track race.
Exactly. A rebel faction will rush to the Election Commission claiming they have the majority support of both the organizational and legislative wings, begging for the official party symbol. Meanwhile, the original party leadership rushes to the Speaker, demanding the rebels be disqualified for defecting. If the Speaker disqualifies them before the Election Commission rules, the rebels lose their seats. If the Election Commission gives the rebels the party symbol first, they effectively become the original party, and the merger clause protects them. It is a high-stakes legal escape room.
While politicians look for these complex legal loopholes to escape accountability, law enforcement is deploying new, instant technology to ensure everyday criminals have nowhere to hide. Let's move into GS3 technology. The National Crime Records Bureau has just launched the SCAN app.
SCAN stands for Systematic Criminal Analysis Network. It is a genuinely transformative piece of technology for field policing in India. It is a secure mobile application paired with a portable Bluetooth biometric scanner. A police officer on routine patrol can scan a suspect's fingerprint on the street and within 30 seconds match it against the national database.
Which database are we talking about?
The AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System.
How exactly does AFIS work? Is it literally just taking a picture of a fingerprint and scrolling through a gallery?
No, it's much more sophisticated. When a fingerprint is taken during an arrest, the system maps the minutiae points, the specific ridges, bifurcations, and endpoints unique to that print. It converts that physical geometry into a complex mathematical algorithm. The AFIS database currently holds the digitized minutia points of over 500 million arrested and convicted individuals. When the cop on the street uses the scan app, it sends the live scan to the central server, which algorithmically compares it against those 500 million records in a fraction of a second.
And it connects to other intelligence networks too, right?
Yes. It is integrated with NADRI, the National Intelligence Grid, and the CCTNS, the Crime and Criminal Tracking Network and Systems, which digitally connects over 16,000 police stations nationwide. The field applications are immense. An officer can instantly identify an unknown body at a crime scene, verify identities at porous border checkpoints, or pull up a driver's entire prior charge sheet history during a midnight traffic stop, rather than taking them down to the station for hours of interrogation.
Having a state-of-the-art forensic lab in a constable's smartphone is undeniably powerful for catching criminals. But let's play devil's advocate here. Without a comprehensive, transparent surveillance law, aren't we just building a digital panopticon on the fly? My main fear is database commingling.
And that is the exact constitutional anxiety surrounding this tech. The AFIS database is lawfully collected under the criminal procedure codes. If you are arrested, the state has the right to take your biometrics. But India also has the Aadhaar database, which contains the biometric data of over 1 billion entirely innocent citizens collected specifically for welfare delivery and identity verification.
Right, and the Supreme Court was very clear about that boundary.
Extremely clear. In the landmark 2018 Puttaswamy judgment, which upheld Aadhaar, the Supreme Court explicitly restricted the state from using Aadhaar data for general law enforcement or mass surveillance without highly specific, targeted legal authorization. There must remain an impenetrable digital firewall between criminal biometric databases like AFIS and civilian databases like Aadhaar.
But does the new data protection law maintain that firewall?
It's debatable. Under the new Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023, there are very broad exemptions granted to state instrumentalities to process personal data for the prevention and investigation of offenses.
That sounds like a loophole big enough to drive a server truck through.
Privacy advocates argue that it is. While the exemptions exist, constitutional lawyers maintain they are not a blank check. They still require purpose limitation. If the scan app ecosystem quietly starts pinging the Aadhaar registry to identify people who aren't in the criminal database without a transparent codified legal process, it becomes a severe, systematic violation of the fundamental right to privacy. The technology is advancing far faster than our legal safeguards.
And even if this technology helps the police catch suspects in 30 seconds, it is entirely meaningless if the courts take 30 years to process them. This brings us to a massive initiative announced by Home Minister Amit Shah, the Justice by 2029 target.
The sheer scale of the judicial crisis in India is difficult to comprehend. We currently have 5.38 crore pending cases across the entire judicial system. Over 71% of these cases have been languishing for more than a year. The Home Minister's goal is to dramatically reduce this backlog and deliver justice in 5 core pending criminal cases within the next 3 years, effectively clearing the deck by 2029.
5 crore cases in 36 months. How is that mechanically possible? What is the actual strategy?
The government is relying on a 4-pillar strategy. First, the physical expansion of capacity through the establishment of 1,000 new fast-track special courts, or FTSCs. These will be entirely dedicated to heinous crimes like rape, POCSO offenses against children, and terrorism. Second, procedural efficiency. They are making video conferencing mandatory for routine remand hearings, meaning police no longer have to spend entire days transporting prisoners to and from court just to get a date extended.
That alone will save so much time.
Absolutely. Third, they are rolling out Phase 3 of the e-courts project to fully digitize case management, evidence submission, and summons.
And the 4th pillar involves the massive overhaul of our criminal codes that just happened.
Correct. The strict enforcement of the new timelines mandated by the Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita, the BNSS, which officially replaces colonial-era CRPC. The BNSS mandates that police must file charge sheets within 90 days of an FIR, and courts must conclude trials for certain categories of offenses within 30 days of framing charges.
Okay, but let's look at the reality on the ground. We are mandating 30-day trials by law, but we currently have over 25,000 vacant judge seats across the country at the district and subordinate levels. Isn't this like demanding a restaurant serve a 5-course meal in 5 minutes when half the kitchen staff hasn't been hired?
That is the elephant in the courtroom. India has a judge-to-population ratio of about 21 judges per million people. For context, the Law Commission recommended we need at least 50 judges per million people decades ago, and developed nations often have over 100. Technology like e-courts and procedural timelines like the BNSS are absolutely necessary, but they are tools. They cannot replace human adjudication. A computer cannot weigh witness testimony. The structural root of the pendency crisis is the chronic vacancy crisis.
And the human cost of this pendency is horrifying when you look at who is actually sitting in our prisons.
It's a human rights disaster.
Yeah.
77% of India's prison population are under trials. These are people who have not been convicted of any crime. They're simply awaiting trial. Many of them have been incarcerated for longer than the maximum sentence they would face if they were actually found guilty.
And the Supreme Court has ruled on this extensively.
Yes, tracing back to the 1979 Hussain-Arqat case, where the Supreme Court explicitly ruled that a speedy trial is an integral part of the fundamental right to life and liberty under Article 21. Setting ambitious political targets like justice by 2029 is positive intent, but without filling those 25,000 vacancies and drastically expanding free legal aid through NELISA, the system will remain choked and the undertrials will remain in cages.
And here is the truly terrifying part. It's not just judges we are missing. We are structurally losing the very lawyers needed to fight these cases for the common man. Chief Justice of India Surya Kant recently flagged a severe brain drain in the legal profession.
Speaking at a recent Bar Council of India conference, the CGI highlighted a deeply disturbing trend regarding our premier legal institutions. Over the last few decades, India has built 23 elite national law universities, the NLUs, accessible through the highly competitive CL8 exam. These institutes produce brilliant, globally competitive legal minds. But these graduates are almost entirely abandoning the practice of litigation in India's district courts.
Where are you going?
They are being immediately absorbed by massive corporate law firms, international investment banks, or migrating to foreign jurisdictions like London or Singapore.
Well, let's look at the economics. It makes complete sense. I was reading the starting salaries. A junior advocate starting out in a district court doing the grueling work of civil litigation or criminal defense might make anywhere from 5,000 to maybe 30,000 rupees a month, often working without formal contracts under senior lawyers. Meanwhile, a fresh 23-year-old NLU graduate walking into a Tier 1 corporate firm in Mumbai pulls in upwards of 1.5 lakh rupees a month from day one, plus bonuses.
It is a profound economic mismatch, but it's also a skills mismatch. The NLUs heavily gear their curriculum toward corporate transactions, mergers and acquisitions, and international arbitration. They do not effectively train students in the messy, hyperlocal procedural realities of district court oral advocacy.
So what is the CJI's proposed solution?
He proposed the creation of a Young Lawyers Welfare and Development Fund. The idea is that senior wealthy advocates and large corporate firms would contribute to a corpus that provides a guaranteed baseline stipend to junior litigators during their first 3 to 5 years, the most financially vulnerable period of their careers, so they can survive while they build a practice in the lower courts.
It's an interesting idea, but the current reality is stark. We have effectively built elite, state-funded academies that act as pipelines for highly skilled corporate mercenaries, leaving the trenches of everyday justice completely unstaffed.
That is the tragedy, and you have to view this through the lens of the Constitution, specifically Article 39A.
The directive principle regarding free legal aid.
Yes. Article 39A directs the state to ensure that the legal system promotes justice on a basis of equal opportunity, specifically mandating free legal aid to ensure that opportunities for securing justice are not denied to any citizen by reason of economic disabilities. But think about how the system actually works. The vast majority of India's poor Dalits, marginalized tribal communities, vulnerable women, access the justice system at the district court level. They don't go to the Supreme Court. If the brightest legal minds systematically refuse to practice in the district courts, we are structurally guaranteeing that our most vulnerable citizens receive inferior legal representation against the might of the state police machinery.
This brain drain in the legal sector, the search for better paying formal work, is part of a much larger national conversation about where our jobs are actually coming from. Let's shift to GS3 economy and look at the PM-VBRY scheme. Prime Minister Modi just announced that the scheme has generated 70 lakh new jobs.
The PM Viksit Bharat Rozgar Yojana is a massive employment incentive program launched in the 2024-25 union budget. It set an ambitious target of creating 3 crore new formal sector jobs over a 2-year period. It operates primarily through direct benefit transfers, or DBTs.
How does the mechanism actually incentivize hiring?
The government provides financial subsidies directly to employers who hire first-time workers. Specifically, the government covers a significant portion of the Mandatory Employees Provident Fund Organization, or EPFO, contributions for these new hires for their first few years. It artificially lowers the cost to the company of hiring a formal employee.
Looking at the sector breakdown of these 70 lakh jobs is quite interesting. Manufacturing took the lead at 28%, followed by IT at 19%, retail and logistics at 17%, and healthcare at 12%.
That diversification is exactly what economists want to see. Historically, India's formal job creation leaned dangerously heavily on the IT and high-end services sectors, which don't employ the masses. Seeing manufacturing take the lead at 28% suggests that the government's massive production-linked incentive, or PLI schemes, might finally be translating into actual factory floor hiring.
But I want to dig into the methodology of this data because there is a glaring statistical contradiction here. The government claims 70 lakh new jobs, and they verify this by pointing to 70 lakh new registrations in the EPFO database. Yet, the Periodic Labor Force Survey, the PLFS, continues to show youth unemployment hovering around a concerning 15%. How can both be true? Are we actually creating new slices of the economic pie, or are we just shuffling people around?
You've identified the core debate among labor economists right now. The crucial distinction is what the EPFO database actually measures. It measures formalization. Imagine a worker who has been employed for 3 years at a small, unregistered garment workshop, paid entirely in cash, with no benefits.
An informal sector worker.
Exactly. Now, because of the PMVBRY subsidy, a larger registered textile factory hires that same worker, gives them a formal contract, and signs them up for a Provident Fund account. That worker suddenly appears in the EPFO database as a new subscriber.
Ah, so to the EPFO, that looks like a brand new job created from thin air.
Yes. Now, make no mistake, this is fantastic for the worker. Moving from the informal to the formal sector means they finally get a social safety net, verifiable work experience, and access to the formal banking system. Formalization is a massive economic positive. However, from a macroeconomic perspective, it does not necessarily mean a net new job was added to the overall economy. That worker was already working, they just changed their tax status. Therefore, the 70 lakh figure represents a massive, highly successful wave of formalization accelerated by government subsidies. But the true number of absolutely new jobs created for 22-year-olds entering the workforce for the very first time is likely a much smaller subset of that headline number.
That makes perfect sense. Now, one sector where the government isn't just shuffling jobs, but aggressively pushing for massive ground-up industrial scale is defense. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh made a powerful speech regarding self-reliance.
He stated unequivocally, "A nation that is capable of meeting its own defense needs can move forward confidently. India today is that nation." And he backed the rhetoric up with hard, undeniable numbers. India achieved a record 1.78 lakh crore rupees in domestic defense production in the FY 2025-26 period. Furthermore, our defense exports crossed 23,500 crore rupees, reaching over 100 countries.
This focus on domestic production isn't just an economic make-in-India pitch. It's a fundamental strategic doctrine, isn't it?
Exactly. The core doctrine here is that defense autonomy is the absolute prerequisite for strategic autonomy. If you're entirely dependent on foreign countries, whether it is Russia, the US, or France, for your fighter jets, your missile guidance systems, and your artillery shells, your foreign policy is inherently constrained.
Because they hold the kill switch.
Right. You cannot take independent military action that your primary arms supplier disagrees with because they can simply choke off your supply of critical spare parts in the middle of a war. Rajnath Singh explicitly linked this domestic capacity to the success of Operation Sindoor in May 2025.
Operation Sindoor was the kinetic strike against cross-border infrastructure, where indigenous tech really proved its mettle in combat for the first time. We used DRDO missiles, ISRO targeting satellites, and HAL Tejas fighters. It's the difference between renting your security from a landlord who can evict you and owning the deed to your own house. But here's my question. Are we truly building this technology from scratch, or are we just assembling imported foreign parts in Indian factories and slapping a flag on it?
That is the critical evolution happening right now. For decades, it was mostly assembly license production. But the transition to true indigenous design is accelerating. The Defense Production-Linked Incentive Scheme has brought in massive private capital, 12,000 crore rupees, from giants like L&T, Tata Advanced Systems, and Bharat Forge. More crucially for the future, the IDEX initiatives in Church. Innovations for Defense Excellence is aggressively funding over 350 domestic startups. They are bypassing the slow public sector behemoths and funding agile private teams to build deep tech solutions from scratch, particularly in AI targeting, swarm drones, and secure communications.
To see the ultimate physical manifestation of this policy, we just have to look at what happened at the Mazagon dock in Mumbai on June 20th. This is an incredible feat of engineering, the historic simultaneous commissioning of 3 indigenous naval vessels.
This was an unprecedented display of industrial capacity and a clear signal to the Indo-Pacific. Prime Minister Modi commissioned INS Nilgiri, INS Surat, and INS Vakshir all on the exact same day. If you are mapping our strategic assets, Mazagondoc Shipbuilders Limited in Mumbai is the beating heart of our naval self-reliance. Let's break down the hardware, starting with INS Nilgiri. INS Nilgiri is the lead ship of Project 17A. It's a 6,670-ton stealth frigate. It is heavily armed with supersonic BrahMos cruise missiles and LRSAM anti-aircraft systems, boasting 75% indigenous content. Next is INS Surat, the fourth and final ship of the Project 15B Visakhapatnam-class guided missile destroyers. At 7,500 tons, it is one of the most lethal, technologically advanced surface combatants currently patrolling the Indian Ocean, with 85% indigenous content.
And finally, a different beast entirely, INS Vakshir.
Yes, INS Vakshir is a submarine. Specifically, it is the sixth and final Cavalry-class conventional submarine built under Project 75, which was based on the French Scorpion design.
Now, the completion of Project 75 is a massive milestone for the Navy, but reading between the lines, it also highlights a critical, lingering vulnerability in our capabilities. Let's talk about the submarine gap.
It is the most pressing concern for naval planners. India currently operates a mixed, aging fleet of Russian, German, and French-origin conventional diesel-electric submarines, alongside a few nuclear-powered platforms. But to truly dominate the choke points of the Indian Ocean and effectively counter the rapid expansion of the Chinese Navy, we desperately need more boats, specifically equipped with air-independent propulsion or AIP technology.
Why is AIP such a game-changer for a submarine?
Traditional diesel-electric submarines like the Cavalry class without AIP have a fatal flaw. They run on batteries while submerged. When those batteries run low, the submarine must surface or raise a snorkel to run its noisy diesel engines to recharge them. This is called indiscretion rate. When a submarine surfaces, it is highly vulnerable to detection by enemy radar and patrol aircraft. AIP technology uses fuel cells or closed-cycle engines that allow a submarine to generate electricity and remain submerged and stealthy for weeks at a time without needing atmospheric oxygen. Our upcoming Project 75I aims to build 6 new submarines equipped with indigenous AIP technology currently being perfected by the DRDO.
Commissioning 3 massive, highly complex war machines on a single day. Is this a deliberate show of industrial force to our neighbors?
Undoubtedly. Mazagondoc is sending a message not just to adversaries in Beijing and Islamabad, but also to potential export clients in Southeast Asia and Africa. India is proving it can seamlessly run multiple highly complex shipbuilding lines simultaneously, a capability reserved for only the top tier of global maritime powers. While our shipyards are focused on building these multi-billion-dollar behemoths of the sea, our defense strategy for the sky is getting significantly smaller, cheaper, and more agile. The Ministry of Defense has just released a radical new drone partnership framework.
This represents a fundamental pivot in our procurement philosophy. Historically, India operated on a simple buyer model. We would identify a need, open a tender, and buy finished, fully built drones from abroad, like the Heron drones from Israel or the MQ-9 Reaper drones from the US. The new drone partnership framework, the DPF, stops that entirely. It mandates that foreign original equipment manufacturers, if they want to sell to the Indian military, must form joint ventures in India with at least 51% Indian ownership.
A controlling stake for the Indian partner.
Exactly. Furthermore, it mandates full, unhindered technology transfer of the core systems and grants India the explicit right to export the jointly produced drones to third-party countries.
Why the sudden aggressive shift in policy? Global defense companies guard their intellectual property fiercely. Why force this now?
Because of the harsh lessons learned from the ongoing war in Ukraine and our own Operation Sindoor. In modern warfare, drones are no longer precious, unlosable assets like a fighter jet. They are highly attritable. They are expendable munitions. You might lose 50 drones in a single day of heavy combat. If you rely on importing finished drones, you face severe technology denial risks. Your foreign supplier could succumb to political pressure and freeze your shipments, or your supply chain for critical spare parts could be choked off instantly. The DPF tells global giants, you can access our massive, lucrative defense budget, but the price of admission is handing over your blueprints and teaching us how to build them ourselves.
And we aren't just talking about little quadcopters with cameras.
No. The focus of the DPF is on high-end strike capabilities. We need MALE and HALE platforms, medium and high-altitude long-endurance drones capable of carrying missiles. Even more urgently, we need domestic production of loitering munitions, often called kamikaze drones, which loiter over a battlefield and crash into tanks or radar arrays. Equally important is building robust counter-UAS systems, lasers, and electronic jammers to defend our own troops against incoming enemy drone swarms.
This relentless push for ultimate self-reliance in defense hardware mirrors a massive simultaneous national mission for self-reliance in our public health and genetics. Let's move to GS2 health. On World Sickle Cell Day, President Murmu highlighted the mission to eradicate sickle cell anemia in India by 2047.
Sickle cell anemia is a devastating, incredibly painful genetic disorder. To understand the science, it's an autosomal recessive condition.
Meaning what, exactly?
It means the disease is carried on a non-sex chromosome, and recessive means you need 2 copies of the defective gene to actually get the disease. Specifically, it involves a mutation in the HBB gene. If a child inherits just one defective gene from one parent, they are a carrier. They have the sickle cell trait, but they usually live a normal, symptom-free life. However, if 2 carriers have a child, there's a 25% chance that child inherits the defective gene from both parents. That child will be born with the full-blown disease.
What does the mutation actually do to the body?
It causes the body to produce abnormal hemoglobin. Under stress or low oxygen, this defective hemoglobin clumps together, physically distorting the normally round, flexible red blood cells into a rigid, sharp sickle or crescent shape.
And because they're rigid, they can't flow through capillaries smoothly.
Exactly. They cause microscopic traffic jams. These deformed cells physically block small blood vessels, completely cutting off oxygen to tissues and organs. This causes excruciating, debilitating pain known as vaso-occlusive crises. Over time, it leads to severe organ damage, strokes, and a drastically reduced life expectancy.
And the burden of this disease in India is heavily geographically and socially concentrated, isn't it?
Yes, disproportionately so. We see roughly 50,000 babies born with this disease every single year, predominantly within marginalized tribal communities across states like Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. The government has launched a massive, unprecedented screening mission. They have screened over 1.8 crore people in tribal areas so far. They've identified over 1.2 lakh active patients and put thousands of them on hydroxyurea.
Hydroxyurea is the primary drug treatment. How does it work?
It is a fascinating drug. It essentially tricks the body into producing fetal hemoglobin, the type of hemoglobin we make before we are born, which isn't affected by the sickle cell mutation. This dilutes the sickle cells and can literally halve the frequency of those agonizing pain crises. But the government's ultimate goal isn't just treatment. The stated policy is total elimination by the year 2047.
The word elimination, when applied to human genetics, carries an incredibly heavy historical weight. How do we ensure this remains a compassionate public health service and doesn't cross the line into state coercion?
That is the most sensitive ethical tightrope of this entire mission. You cannot cure a gene across a population of millions. The only way elimination works mechanically is by preventing new births of children with the disease.
So how is the state managing that?
Through the screening data. If the screening identifies a trait-by-trait couple, meaning both the man and the woman are asymptomatic carriers who want to get married, the state provides intense genetic counseling to explain the 25% risk. If a pregnancy does occur, the state offers free prenatal genetic diagnosis. Under the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, abortion is legally permissible if there is a substantial risk that the child would suffer from severe physical or mental abnormalities.
But the choice must remain entirely with the parents.
Absolutely voluntary. Given the long history of marginalization and mistrust among tribal communities toward state medical interventions, any heavy-handed approach could easily be perceived as eugenics. The state must carefully balance its public health imperative under Article 47 to raise the level of nutrition and public health with the strict protection of tribal autonomy and dignity under Article 46. It requires deep, continuous empathy and community trust, not just clinical, bureaucratic efficiency.
Just as we are attempting to engineer a healthier genetic future for our population, we're simultaneously trying to re-engineer the beating mechanical heart of our military and our national energy grid. Let's touch quickly on a vital piece of defense manufacturing before diving into the national energy crisis. BHEL is providing indigenous gas turbines to the Navy.
Yes, Farad Heavy Electricals Limited, a massive public sector undertaking, is supplying 12 1.25 megawatt gas turbine generators for upcoming naval vessels. While it might seem like a dry technical footnote, it represents a critical deepening of the Make in India ecosystem.
Because power generation on a warship isn't like plugging in a generator at home.
Far from it. These are highly complex, niche, marine-grade technologies that must operate flawlessly under extreme combat stress, corrosive saltwater environments, and violent ship maneuvers. Historically, we strictly imported the mechanical hearts of our ships from Russia or the West. Having BHEL master this tech adds a vital layer of resilience to our defense supply chains.
From generating power for our destroyers at sea to the monumental task of generating power for the entire country. Let's move to GS3 environment. India has just hit a staggering milestone. We have achieved the cheapest power in our history. Utility-scale solar tariffs have plummeted to 2 rupees and 12 paise per kilowatt hour.
It is a stunning, undeniable economic victory for renewable energy. To put that 2.1 rupees in perspective, power generated from a new coal plant costs anywhere between 4.5 to 6 rupees per unit. Even when you add the cost of massive battery parks to that solar energy so you can provide round-the-clock power, what the industry calls firm and dispatchable renewable energy, or FDRE, the blended cost is still only around 4.77 rupees.
So solar is fundamentally outcompeting coal purely on brutal market economics, not just climate goodwill.
Exactly. Market forces are driving the transition. India is now the third largest solar market globally, boasting over 150 gigawatts of installed capacity.
But there is a massive, tragic catch to this success story. We are currently curtailing, which is a polite engineering word for wasting massive amounts of this incredibly cheap energy.
We wasted roughly 4 terawatt hours of solar generation last year.
4 terawatt hours. That could power entire cities. Why is it being wasted?
Curtailment happens because of the geographic and temporal realities of solar power. Imagine the massive solar parks in the deserts of Rajasthan. If you're mapping this, Rajasthan is the absolute epicenter of our solar boom. At noon on a sunny day, those panels are pumping out maximum peak electricity. But local demand in Rajasthan isn't high enough to absorb it all. And the physical transmission lines connecting Rajasthan to high-demand industrial centers like Delhi or Maharashtra are completely saturated. They cannot carry any more electrons.
Like trying to push a fire hose of water through a garden hose.
Precisely. And the power grid operates on a strict frequency. Think of it like a heart rate. It must remain perfectly balanced around 50 hertz. If you pump too much power into the grid without enough demand, the frequency spikes and the entire grid can suffer a catastrophic blackout, a cardiac arrest. So, to prevent this, the grid operators literally have to call up the solar plants in Rajasthan and order them to shut down their panels at the peak of the day.
It's like producing the cheapest, purest water in the world at the top of a mountain, but having no pipes to bring it down to the thirsty cities below. Wasting 4 terawatt hours is an infrastructure tragedy. How do we fix the pipes?
We need to fix the grid reality urgently through 2 massive infrastructure pushes. First, we need more wires. The Power Grid Corporation of India is currently building thousands of kilometers of interregional transmission lines through its Green Energy Corridors project. Second, we need massive battery energy storage systems, or BESS. We need to store that noon sunlight to use at 8 p.m. when everyone turns on their air conditioners. We currently have around 5 gigawatts of storage. The Central Electricity Authority estimates we need over 200 gigawatts of battery storage to properly balance the grid by 2030.
And as solar gets cheaper and batteries get built, this creates a death spiral for coal, right?
Yes, driven by a regulatory principle called merit-ordered dispatch. Grid operators are legally mandated to buy the cheapest power available on the market first. Since solar at 2.1 rupees is the absolute cheapest, it gets dispatched first. This forces expensive coal plants to run at much lower capacities. Because they are running less often, they have fewer units of electricity over which to spread their massive fixed operational costs. This makes coal power even more expensive, which pushes it further down the merit order, accelerating its decline. However, we are in a highly volatile transition period. We still desperately need coal for nighttime baseload power until those battery parks are fully built.
And our failure to transition away from fossil fuels fast enough is literally altering the chemistry of the air we breathe right now. A terrifying new study shows the heat waves are causing a severe spike in ground-level ozone across Indian cities.
The study, conducted jointly by IIT Bombay and NIRI, found that during the severe prolonged heat waves of 2024 to 2026, major Indian cities experienced a 15% to 25% spike in ground-level ozone compared to non-heat wave days.
We need to clarify the chemistry here because the terminology is confusing. When people hear ozone, they usually think of the hole in the ozone layer, and they think ozone is a good thing that protects us.
You are thinking of stratospheric ozone, which sits 15 to 35 kilometers above the Earth's surface. That ozone is absolutely vital. It is the good ozone that blocks deadly ultraviolet radiation from the sun. But ground level, or tropospheric ozone, which forms right where we breathe, is a highly toxic, corrosive pollutant.
Where does it come from? Are cars emitting it?
No, and that is what makes it so hard to control. Ground-level ozone is not emitted directly from tailpipes or factory smokestacks. It is a secondary pollutant formed through complex photochemistry. When nitrogen oxides, which do come from vehicle exhaust, mix with volatile organic compounds, VOCs, emitted by industries and even certain trees, they just float in the air. But when you add intense sunlight and severe heat waves, that heat acts as a catalyst. It bakes the NOx and VOCs together, chemically transforming them into ozone.
And what does inhaling that baked chemical soup do to the human body?
The health impacts are devastating. Ozone is a powerful oxidant. Inhaling it is essentially like getting a sunburn on the inside of your lungs. It causes severe respiratory irritation, permanently reduces lung function in children, and triggers massive surges in asthma attacks and hospital admissions. The World Health Organization sets the safe limit at 100 micrograms per cubic meter. During recent summers, the air in Delhi and Mumbai regularly exceeded 150 to 180 micrograms.
During pollution season, we all just wear N95 masks. Doesn't that work?
No. An N95 mask is designed to filter out particulate matter PM 2.5, which is microscopic physical dust. Ozone is a gas. It passes right through an N95 mask. A mask offers zero protection.
So the hotter it gets, the more the air bakes into an unfilterable toxic gas. We can't mask our way out of this one.
Exactly. Yeah. This is why the national transition to electric vehicles is not just a long-term climate change strategy. It is an immediate, urgent, urban public health imperative. EVs completely eliminate tailpipe NOx emissions, directly cutting off one of the two main chemical precursors needed to brew this toxic ozone soup.
So how do we stop the heat waves themselves? It turns out fixing the power grid with solar and switching everyone to EVs is only a quarter of the problem. We face a massive, almost insurmountable hurdle in decarbonizing the rest of our economy. Let's look at the challenge of electrifying industry.
We talk endlessly in the media about reaching 500 gigawatts of clean electricity, but electricity only accounts for about 25% of India's total final energy demand. The other 75% is consumed by transport and heavy industry, the foundational sectors of our economy like steel, cement, chemicals, and fertilizers.
These are what climate scientists call the hard-to-abate sectors. Why are they so hard to clean up?
Heat. You cannot smelt raw iron ore into steel or bake limestone into cement using a solar panel. These core industrial processes require intense, sustained, reliable heat of over 1,000 degrees Celsius. Currently, the only economically viable way to generate that kind of intense heat is by burning massive amounts of coal and natural gas directly inside the blast furnaces.
What is the technological alternative?
The holy grail is green hydrogen. You use renewable solar energy to split water into oxygen and hydrogen, and then you burn the hydrogen in the blast furnace. It burns incredibly hot, and the only byproduct is water vapor. It is perfectly clean.
So why aren't all our steel mills using it today?
Economics. Right now, producing green hydrogen in India costs around 350 to 400 rupees per kilogram. To be commercially competitive against cheap, dirty coal, that cost needs to plummet to about 150 rupees per kilogram.
This is the concept of the green premium.
Yes, the green premium is the extra cost a business must pay to adopt a clean technology over a dirty, established one. In a highly price-sensitive, developing economy like India, a cement manufacturer simply cannot afford to swallow a 200 rupee green premium without passing the cost to consumers, which would trigger massive inflation and make our infrastructure unbuildable. We need massive technological breakthroughs to scale up electrolyzers and lower the cost of hydrogen, and we need cheap global financing to bridge the gap in the meantime.
What about forcing their hand through carbon pricing? I know India has the carbon credit trading scheme, the CCTS, coming online.
The CCTS is currently in a voluntary phase, but it will become mandatory for highly energy-intensive sectors starting in 2026. The mechanism is simple. By forcing heavily polluting industries to buy carbon credits to offset their emissions, the government artificially raises the cost of using coal. This effectively shrinks the green premium, making hydrogen look relatively more attractive. But the government has to walk a razor-thin tightrope here. If they set the carbon price too high, too fast, they will bankrupt domestic industries or trigger crippling inflation in the housing and infrastructure markets.
It feels like we're celebrating fixing the leaky faucet while the roof is completely caved in. If we can't figure out how to green our steel and cement sectors, the Prime Minister's pledge to reach net zero by 2070 is just a pipe dream.
It is arguably the most monumental engineering and economic challenge in Indian history. And as a pragmatic fallback, India is currently investing heavily in carbon capture, utilization, and storage CCUS technologies. This involves retrofitting massive chemical filters directly onto the smokestacks of existing coal-fired factories to trap the carbon dioxide before it hits the atmosphere and then burying it deep underground. It is an acknowledgement that we will likely be forced to burn fossil fuels for several more decades while we wait for hydrogen to become cheap.
And the longer we take to figure out this green premium, the more the warming climate physically destabilizes our national borders. Moving to GS1 geography, I want to look at a terrifying new report regarding the expanding glacial lakes in Arunachal Pradesh. The Space Application Center of ISRO recently released a satellite imaging study showing that 4 major glacial lakes in the Tawang and West Kemeng districts of Arunachal Pradesh have expanded by a staggering 25% to 40% in just the last decade alone.
For our mapping focus, Tawang is situated at a very high altitude, right on the border. This expansion of water leads directly to the imminent risk of a GLOF, a glacial lake outburst flood. Walk me through the mechanics of a GLOF. Why do these lakes suddenly explode?
As the Himalayan glaciers retreat at an accelerated pace due to atmospheric warming, the vast amounts of meltwater pool into newly formed lakes at the snout or the bottom of the glacier. The critical issue is the dam holding this water back. These are not concrete dams. They are natural dams made of fragile, loose moraine, a mixture of rocks, dirt, and ice pushed forward by the glacier over centuries.
So they aren't structurally sound.
Not at all. As the lakes grow heavier and deeper from the melting ice, the hydrostatic pressure on these loose moraine dams increases. If there is a trigger, an avalanche falling into the lake, a minor earthquake, or just sheer water pressure, the moraine dam ruptures catastrophically. It releases millions of cubic meters of water, ice chunks, and massive boulders down the narrow mountain valleys at terrifying, inescapable speeds. We saw the catastrophic results of this exact phenomenon during the 2021 Chamoli disaster in Uttarakhand, where a sudden flood wiped out 2 massive hydropower plants and killed over 200 people in minutes.
But the expansion of these specific lakes in Arunachal adds a highly volatile strategic dimension to the climate crisis.
Absolutely. Tawang and West Kemeng sit directly on the line of actual control, the LAC, with China. These are highly sensitive, heavily militarized zones that have seen recent physical clashes between troops. If a GLOF event occurs in these specific valleys, it threatens to instantly wash away critical bridges, forward operating bases, artillery emplacements, and the single-lane supply roads utilized by the Indian Army to maintain its defensive posture against Chinese incursions.
Climate change isn't just an environmental issue here. It's practically acting as an unpredictable, heavily armed, non-state actor actively attacking our border logistics.
That is exactly how military planners in South Bloc are beginning to view it. The National Disaster Management Authority is rushing to install automated early warning sensors at these high-altitude lakes, but the reality is that the cryosphere, the frozen water ecosystem of the Himalayas, is fundamentally and rapidly destabilizing.
And it isn't just our northern borders facing climate-induced friction. If we look at our mapping notes, we have Rajbari in Bangladesh. This is the site of the newly approved Padma Barrage.
Yes, Rajbari is located downstream of India's Farakka Barrage on the Ganges system. As glacial melt patterns change the flow of the major Himalayan rivers, downstream riparian countries like Bangladesh are building immense infrastructure like the Padma Barrage to secure their shrinking water share. This is becoming a critical diplomatic flashpoint because the historic 1996 Ganges water-sharing treaty between India and Bangladesh approaches its expiration in December 2026. The changing climate is forcing a complete renegotiation of how South Asia shares its most vital resource.
While we measure the structural vulnerabilities of our physical borders and rivers, we must also confront the deep structural vulnerabilities within our society. Let's move to GS1 social issues. A prominent op-ed in the Indian Express argues that despite heavy political branding, the government's Nari Shakti or women's empowerment initiatives are fundamentally failing women on a structural level.
The crux of the author's argument highlights the stark contrast between highly visible welfare schemes and stagnant structural economic reality. The government heavily promotes and successfully executes massive welfare programs. The PM Matru Vandana Yojana for direct maternity benefits, the Sukanya Samriddhi scheme for girl child savings, and the Lakpati Didi initiative targeting rural self-help groups.
And these are objectively good programs, right? They put cash in hands.
They are vital interventions that provide crucial marginal economic relief to millions of vulnerable families. But the critique is that these schemes act as band-aids. They do not dismantle the deeply entrenched patriarchal structures that systematically keep women out of the broader formal economy.
The numbers back that up. The female labor force participation rate, the FLFPR, sits at around 35%.
And even that 35% headline figure is deeply misleading if you look at the subdata. While 35% is a significant improvement from the historic low of 23% a few years ago, economists point out that this growth is almost entirely driven by rural women entering low-paid or entirely unpaid agricultural work as helpers on family farms due to rural economic distress. The FLFPR for women in the urban formal sector where the high-paying secure jobs are remains abysmally low, hovering under 20%. Furthermore, even when women do secure formal employment, they face a staggering 28% gender pay gap for performing the exact same work as their male counterparts.
The article also points out a massive silent failure regarding workplace safety, the POSH Act.
The Prevention of Sexual Harassment at Workplace Law is a perfect example of structural failure. The law clearly mandates that any organization with 10 or more employees must establish an internal committee to securely and fairly handle harassment complaints. Yet, comprehensive corporate studies show an astonishing 79% non-compliance rate across mid-sized firms in India. The legal framework exists on paper, but the state utterly fails to enforce it.
We're giving women bank accounts and savings schemes, but we aren't auditing companies to ensure they have safe environments. It's treating the symptom of poverty while ignoring the disease of workplace hostility that pushes women out of careers in the first place.
Precisely. And this structural delay extends to the highest levels of political representation. The landmark Women's Reservation Act was celebrated when it passed in 2023, promising to guarantee 33% of seats in Parliament for women. But the fine print legally linked its implementation to a future, highly complex census and constituency delimitation exercise. This mathematical delay means we won't actually see a Parliament with 33% female representation until the 2034 general elections at the earliest. The core argument is that true structural empowerment requires immediate, enforceable rights, not just delayed political promises and incremental welfare transfers.
Addressing these massive structural vulnerabilities, whether it's women's labor data, glacial floods, or urban heat waves, requires immense, highly unified data. Which brings us to a massive new technological initiative from the Ministry of Earth Sciences. We are talking about the launch of Beacon, the Bharat Climate Observation Network.
This is a major, long overdue leap in our disaster management and climate modeling capabilities.
Yeah.
Historically, India's vital weather data was incredibly siloed across different bureaucratic fiefdoms. The India Meteorological Department, IMD, ran the land-based weather stations. NCOS ran the deep ocean buoys monitoring tsunamis, and various specialized research institutes ran the high-altitude Himalayan observatories. They collected brilliant data, but they didn't seamlessly talk to each other in real time.
So what does Beacon actually do?
Beacon shatters those silos. It is a centralized digital data fusion platform. It forcefully integrates the real-time telemetry feeds from over 4,500 automatic weather stations, 85 advanced Doppler weather radars, upper air balloon observatories, and marine buoys into one single unified digital grid.
Why do we need this massive level of integration right now?
Because despite our space-age satellite advancements, our terrestrial observation station density, meaning the actual number of thermometers and rain gauges on the ground per square kilometer, is still far below the optimal standards set by the World Meteorological Organization. We have massive blind spots, especially in the rugged Himalayan terrain and the deep tribal belts of central India where localized cloudbursts happen. By fusing all available sensors, regardless of which agency owns them, Beacon algorithmically closes these blind spots.
It sounds like we had all these amazing, highly sensitive sensors across the country, but they were speaking different languages. Beacon is the universal translator.
That's a great way to put it. Beacon translates and centralizes the data and then immediately feeds this singular, highly accurate picture to the National Disaster Management Authority. This direct link powers the Sachet early warning system, allowing authorities to push highly localized, life-saving SMS alerts to citizens hours before a flash flood or a cyclone makes landfall, drastically reducing response times.
Unifying intelligence isn't just the key to predicting the weather. It is exactly how the Indian state has systematically dismantled its biggest internal security threat over the last decade. Let's look at our final topic today, A major update from the Ministry of Home Affairs on left-wing extremism, commonly known as Naxalism.
The operational numbers released by the MHA indicate a dramatic, historic collapse of the Maoist insurgency. Under the government's highly coordinated Samadhan doctrine, the geographic footprint of Naxalism has shrunk drastically. The number of LWE-affected districts has plummeted from a high of 126 in 2014 down to just 38 heavily monitored districts today. Violent incidents, attacks on security forces, and civilian casualties have dropped to their absolute lowest levels since official record-keeping began decades ago.
What exactly is the Samadhan doctrine? We hear the acronym, but what are the actual mechanics of the strategy?
It is an acronym that dictates a comprehensive, multi-pronged approach. Smart leadership, aggressive strategy, motivation and training, actionable intelligence, dashboard-based key performance indicators, harnessing technology, action on financing, and no access to recruitment. On the kinetic front, it relies heavily on elite, highly specialized forces like the CRPF Cobra Commandos conducting intelligence-driven, hyper-focused strike missions.
A prime example being Operation Kagar. If we look at our mapping notes, Bastar and Chhattisgarh is the absolute ground zero for this.
Yes, specifically the incredibly dense, previously impenetrable Abujamad forest region within Bastar. Operation Kagar was a massive, sustained intelligence-led sweep through this final Maoist stronghold, resulting in the neutralization of top-tier guerrilla leadership and the dismantling of their core weapon manufacturing camps.
But the doctrine isn't just about sending commandos into the jungle. You can't just shoot your way to permanent peace. There is a massive parallel development prong, isn't there?
Exactly. The development security nexus is the true secret to this success. The state realized you cannot just clear a jungle area with troops and leave. You have to fill the resulting governance vacuum immediately, or the insurgents just come back. Behind the advancing CRPF battalions come the civil engineers. The government has aggressively built over 5,400 kilometers of all-weather roads deep into these remote districts, physically connecting isolated tribal hamlets to the mainland economy. They have installed over 3,500 fortified mobile towers to ensure connectivity. They're bringing in permanent banking access, Eklavya model residential schools for tribal children, and Ayushman Bharat healthcare coverage.
It's the ultimate carrot-and-stick approach, but executed with hyper-precision.
When a previously isolated villager suddenly gets a paved road to sell their produce, a mobile signal to call an ambulance, and a state-funded health clinic in their village, the Maoist ideological narrative that the state has abandoned you loses its oxygen entirely. The security forces provide the physical shield, but the rapid deployment of infrastructure provides the permanent ideological solution.
We have covered massive ground today. We're going to do a quick rapid-fire synthesis to lock in the hard facts for prelims. So, FATF.
39 members, headquartered in Paris, and India is currently in the regular follow-up category.
The new INS ships.
Nilgiri is a Project 17A frigate, Surat is a Project 15B destroyer, and Vakshir is a Project 75 submarine.
Sickle cell.
Autosomal recessive disorder, treated with hydroxyurea, with a 2047 target for elimination.
And ozone.
Ground level is bad, created by NOx, VOCs, and heat. Stratospheric is good.
Perfect. We've tied all the map points together today, from Paris and Fordo internationally to Tawang, Bastar, Mazagon Dock, the solar parks of Rajasthan, and the linguistic history of Kozhikode.
It's all connected.
It really is. Before we sign off, what is the one overarching thought a UPSC aspirant should take away from today's deep dive?
Look at the duality of the Indian state we explored today. We saw India acting as a confident global power negotiating global finance rules at the FATF in Paris, by passing Western sanctions to secure cheap energy, and building an impenetrable defense with stealth frigates and technology transfer drone frameworks. Yet simultaneously, we saw the state struggling with fundamental, localized governance, battling over basic safe footpaths for its citizens, facing a severe crisis of empty judge seats and missing lawyers in the district courts, and grappling with the deeply entrenched structural barriers keeping women out of the economy. The true test of a rising superpower isn't just its external projection of military or diplomatic force. It is whether the domestic, grassroots foundations, the courts, the municipalities, the social structures can actually hold the immense weight of those global ambitions. Think about that tension between our global reach and our local realities as you review today's notes.
A brilliant way to tie it all together. Keep connecting those dots, everyone. Keep looking past the headlines to ask how and why these systems work. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.